It was one of those long, dragging evenings that seemed to have no end. The rain had been falling since afternoon, tapping softly against the tall glass windows of the Belmont Hotel's restaurant. Inside, the lights were warm and golden, bouncing off the polished wood tables and silver cutlery. The smell of roasted herbs and butter filled the air. Guests in elegant suits and sparkling dresses talked in low voices, their laughter occasionally rising over the sound of clinking glasses. Among them moved Clara Evans, a young waitress in her early 20s wearing the standard black and white uniform that made her blend into the background. Her apron was neatly tied, her hair pinned back carefully, and though her face carried a polite smile, her eyes showed quiet exhaustion. She had already worked through breakfast and lunch shifts. Her feet ached, her back hurt, and she hadn't had a proper meal since morning. But she kept going because she had to. Rent was due next week and every extra hour mattered. Clara hadn't always imagined her life like this. As a child, she dreamed of concert halls and grand pianos. Her late father had taught her to play when she was just 6 years old. Their small apartment had been filled with the sound of music, scales, melodies, laughter. After he passed away, she played even more, as if keeping his spirit alive through the piano keys. But dreams didn't pay bills, and when her mother fell ill, Clara dropped out of music school to take up whatever job she could find. Being a waitress was supposed to be temporary, but 3 years later, she was still there, serving others while her own dreams waited quietly in the corner of her heart. That night, the restaurant was busier than usual. A new group of guests was expected. Something big, according to her manager, Mr. Simmons, a strict man who always spoke in a rushed tone. He had told everyone to be on their best behavior. "Important clients tonight," he reminded the staff. "No mistakes, no delays." Clara nodded like everyone else and went back to clearing the tables near the small grand piano that stood in one corner of the room. The piano was beautiful, sleek black, polished, and always spotless. It was usually played by David, the hotel's regular musician. But David had called in sick, so the instrument sat silent like a sleeping giant. Clara paused for a moment, her eyes tracing the shiny keys. 1,000 memories rushed back, the rhythm of her fingers, the soft hum of notes blending together, the calm that music always brought her. She wanted to play even for a second, but she quickly shook off the thought. This was her workplace, not her stage. She picked up another stack of glasses and kept moving. At one of the corner tables, 2 elderly guests were arguing about the wine list. At another, a couple was laughing over dessert. Clara managed to smile and handle everything smoothly, though inside her energy was fading fast. She kept checking the clock, waiting for her shift to end. Every time she thought she could take a short break, someone would call her name. "Miss, could we get more water?" Or, "Excuse me, where's our check?" Her best friend at work, Mara, passed by with a tray of plates and whispered, "You look like you need coffee." Clara grinned weakly. "I need a vacation," she joked, though they both knew it wasn't really a joke. Suddenly, the door to the restaurant opened, and 5 men in suits entered. Their presence changed the whole atmosphere. The staff straightened up instantly. Even the chatter among the guests softened. Mr. Simmons hurried forward to greet them. Clara overheard part of their conversation, something about negotiations and a major deal. She guessed they were the special clients everyone had been talking about. The men were shown to the large table near the piano, the same one Clara had just finished cleaning minutes ago. She stood at the side, waiting for instructions. Mr. Simmons turned to her and said, "Clara, make sure that table stays perfect tonight. No mistakes. Keep their glasses filled and the area spotless." She nodded quickly, trying not to look nervous. For the next hour, Clara worked quietly around them, bringing in drinks, clearing dishes, and adjusting table settings. The men spoke in low, serious tones. From their expressions, she could tell something wasn't going well. Tension hung in the air. She didn't understand what they were discussing, but it seemed important. Occasionally, she caught a word or two. Agreement, deadline, proposal. When she returned to the service counter for a brief moment, she noticed the piano again. Its lid was slightly open, and the keys seemed to glimmer under the chandelier light. For just a heartbeat, she imagined herself sitting there, her hands gliding over the notes, filling the room with warmth instead of silence. It was silly to think that way, she told herself, but she couldn't help it. Outside, thunder rumbled softly. Inside, the restaurant buzzed with whispers and footsteps. Clara moved like clockwork. Polite smile, quick service, gentle words. But deep down, something stirred, a tiny ache, a memory of what she once loved. She didn't know that in just a short while. That same piano would become her stage again, and her music would change not only her life, but the future of the very people she was serving that night. For now, she was just a tired waitress finishing another ordinary shift, but fate was already turning its quiet wheel, setting everything in motion behind the curtain of that rainy evening. The rain outside had slowed to a soft drizzle by the time the important guests arrived. The golden lights of the Belmont Hotel's restaurant reflected gently off the wet streets, creating a dreamy glow through the wide glass windows. Inside, everything had to be perfect. Every plate aligned, every glass spotless, every candle lit at just the right height. The staff was tense, but no one more than Clara Evans, who had been told to stay near the piano table, the one reserved for tonight's high-profile guests. Mr. Simmons, the restaurant manager, moved briskly through the dining hall, his polished shoes clicking on the marble floor. "Clara, remember," he said under his breath as he passed by her. "These men aren't just customers. They're corporate giants. A billion-dollar deal is being discussed at that table. So, no mistakes tonight." He straightened a napkin that didn't even need straightening and then hurried away before she could reply. Clara nodded quietly, adjusting the cuff of her sleeve. She didn't understand much about billion-dollar deals, but she did know one thing. It meant pressure. These men had power, money, and no patience for errors. She took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. The first to walk in was a tall man with gray hair and an expensive watch. His expression was serious, his steps measured. Behind him came 4 others, all dressed sharply in tailored suits, their faces set in professional neutrality. They were greeted with bows, handshakes, and polite smiles from Mr. Simmons. The staff moved quickly, guiding them to the private dining section near the piano. As they sat down, the air changed. The soft background chatter from other guests seemed to fade, replaced by the low hum of business talk. Clara could feel the weight of the moment. She carried a tray of drinks, balancing it carefully as she approached the table. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said softly, her voice steady despite her racing heartbeat. She placed the glasses one by one, crystal clinking against the wood, and offered a gentle smile before stepping back. For a while, everything went smoothly. Orders were taken, appetizers served, and polite small talk floated across the table. But as the evening went on, the atmosphere began to shift. The conversation between the executives turned sharper, their voices quieter but filled with tension. Words like deadlines, legal risks, and withdrawal floated to Clara's ears as she passed by. She could sense that the meeting wasn't going well. She wasn't supposed to notice, but she did. She saw the way one man clenched his jaw, another rubbed his temples, and a third tapped his pen impatiently on the table. They barely touched their food. Even the wine, which usually eased such dinners, went untouched. And through it all, the silence of the piano loomed large. Normally at this hour, soft music would fill the restaurant, creating a calm background hum. But tonight, David the pianist wasn't there, and the room felt oddly empty without the gentle rhythm of his playing. The clinking of cutlery and the low murmurs of business talk echoed too sharply in the stillness. Mr. Simmons noticed it too. He frowned, glancing at the silent piano, and muttered, "This place feels like a courtroom. We need some music, something to relax the atmosphere." He looked around, but there was no musician in sight. Clara froze. She had been refilling water glasses nearby and overheard him. For a moment, a spark lit inside her. "I could play," she thought, the words whispering in her mind before she could stop them. But she hesitated. What if she made a mistake? What if they laughed? Her heart beat faster as she remembered the feel of the keys beneath her fingers, the comfort, the emotion, the escape. It had been months since she'd played anything more than a few quiet notes in her tiny apartment. Still, the thought refused to leave her. Minutes passed and the tension at the executives' table thickened. Voices rose slightly, papers were shuffled, and Mr. Simmons looked increasingly nervous. He turned to Clara suddenly, his voice low but firm. "Clara, can you clear the plates from that table by the piano?" Quickly, she nodded and went over, stacking the empty dishes carefully. Her eyes flicked toward the piano. The keys gleamed softly under the chandelier light, untouched, waiting. She hesitated, her fingertips brushing the smooth surface of the lid as if greeting an old friend. Behind her, she heard one of the executives sigh. "This is going nowhere," he muttered. Another replied in a frustrated tone, "Let's just wrap it up tomorrow." Something about that moment hit her deeply. Maybe it was the exhaustion or the longing she'd carried for years, or just fate nudging her forward. But suddenly Clara turned to Mr. Simmons and said quietly, "Sir, if you'd like, I can play a little." Just something soft to fill the silence. The manager blinked, surprised. "You?" He frowned, glancing at her uniform. "You're a waitress, not a musician." "I studied music," she said simply, "before I started working here." Mr. Simmons hesitated. His eyes darted toward the table of executives, the deal that could make or break his career. The last thing he wanted was a mistake, but the silence in the room felt heavy and uncomfortable. Finally he sighed. "Fine, but keep it quiet. If they complain, you stop immediately." Clara nodded, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear herself think. She walked to the piano, every step feeling unreal, like a dream she wasn't supposed to have. She sat down, straightened her back, and let her fingers hover above the keys. For a moment, everything around her faded. The murmurs, the clinking of glasses, even the rain outside. And then, she played. The first notes were soft and uncertain, like a whisper testing the air. But soon they found their rhythm, gentle, flowing, sincere. The sound filled the restaurant, weaving through the conversations, wrapping the air in warmth. Heads turned. The executives paused mid-sentence. Even Mr. Simmons froze, his mouth slightly open in surprise. Clara didn't see them. Her eyes were half closed, her hands moving instinctively across the keys. She wasn't just playing, she was remembering, feeling, speaking through music the way she hadn't in years. What no one realized then was that this small, quiet act, a waitress sitting at a piano she wasn't meant to touch, was about to change everything. The sound of the piano flowed softly through the restaurant, like the first sunlight after a storm. At first it was barely noticeable, just a few gentle notes that blended with the quiet hum of conversation. But then, as Clara's hands found their confidence, the melody began to bloom. Each note carried warmth, grace, and something deeper, a feeling that could not be faked. People started to notice. The servers paused mid-step. The guests at nearby tables turned their heads. Even the executives at the important table looked up from their documents. The man with the silver hair, who had been frowning moments ago, leaned back slightly and listened. The music wasn't loud, but it filled the room completely, not with noise, but with calm. Clara didn't see any of them. Her mind was far away, somewhere between memory and emotion. She wasn't just playing for an audience. She was playing for herself, for all the moments she had missed music, for the father who taught her to love it, and for the quiet ache of a dream she thought was gone. The piano keys felt familiar under her fingers, smooth and cool. The melody she played wasn't something she planned. It came naturally, as if the music had been waiting inside her all along. It started slow, with soft chords that echoed the rain outside, then lifted gently into something hopeful and bright. The restaurant changed. The air that had been heavy with business tension began to soften. The executives stopped talking altogether. One of them, a younger man from the Japanese delegation, closed his eyes, tapping his fingers lightly on the table in rhythm. Another leaned back, whispering something with a small smile. Even Mr. Simmons, who had been watching nervously from behind the counter, began to relax. It was as if Clara's music had wrapped everyone in a shared silence, not an empty one, but a peaceful one. For the first time that evening, no one was thinking about deadlines, contracts, or deals. They were just listening. A waiter passing by murmured, "I didn't know she could play like that." Mara, Clara's friend, whispered back, "Neither did I. She looks different," and she did. Gone was the tired waitress who had been serving tables all day. Sitting at the piano, Clara looked calm and alive, her face lit by the golden glow of the chandelier. Every movement of her hand seemed effortless, every note carrying emotion that words couldn't express. She played for several minutes, unaware of how completely she had changed the room. When she reached the end of her improvised piece, the final chord lingered in the air, soft and full of meaning. Then silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then quiet applause broke out, Not the loud, showy kind, but the kind that comes from people truly moved. The executives exchanged looks, curious, impressed, perhaps even a little humbled. Mr. Simmons, standing near the bar, exhaled slowly and smiled, shaking his head in disbelief. Clara turned slightly. Realizing what had happened, her cheeks flushing red, she stood up quickly, smoothing her apron. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I didn't mean to interrupt," but before she could finish, the man with silver hair, the lead negotiator, raised a hand. "No," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Please, don't apologize." He glanced at his colleagues. "That was quite something." Clara blinked, unsure what to say. She managed a small nod, her heart still racing, and stepped back toward her serving station. The piano stood silent again, but its echo seemed to stay in the air as if the music hadn't really ended. After that moment, something changed at the executives' table. Their conversation, which had been sharp and tense before, softened. The man who had been arguing now spoke in a more relaxed tone. Laughter, real laughter, returned to the table. The deal that had been on the verge of collapse began to move forward again. Though Clara didn't know it, from her place behind the counter, she watched them carefully, still unsure if she had done something wrong. But Mr. Simmons walked over to her and whispered, "You have no idea what you just did, do you?" She shook her head. "I just played." He smiled, half in disbelief. "Well, whatever it was, you changed the mood of the whole evening." Clara looked back at the piano. For the first time in years, she felt something stir inside her, a tiny flame she thought had gone out long ago. She had only meant to fill the silence, but somehow she had filled the room with emotion, and maybe in some small way brought people closer together. As she went back to her duties, the music still played softly in her head. The sound of clinking glasses returned, laughter resumed, and the rain outside faded to a whisper. But deep down, she knew something had shifted, not just in the restaurant, but in her life. That night, Clara Evans had done more than play the piano. Without realizing it, she had reminded everyone, including herself, of something simple and powerful, that even in the busiest, most complicated moments, a bit of honest beauty can change everything. Clara's fingers hovered above the keys for a long moment, trembling slightly. She could still hear the faint echo of her last note in her mind. It was as if the room itself had taken a breath and was waiting to exhale. Her heart pounded so hard she thought someone might hear it. She wasn't supposed to do this. She was just a waitress, a name on a schedule. But something inside her had refused to stay quiet, and now there was no going back. At first, the sound of the piano had surprised everyone, including her. But now, as the melody continued, the restaurant seemed to fall into a different rhythm. Her rhythm. She could feel every sound around her blending into her playing. The clinking of glasses, the soft murmur of conversation, even the rain outside. It was like everything had joined her music, following her lead. The executives' table, which had been the center of tension and tight faces, now looked calmer. The men leaned back slightly, their shoulders no longer stiff. One of them, a tall man with a gold pen, looked toward the piano with a faint, thoughtful smile. Another, who had been scrolling through his phone moments earlier, set it down and folded his hands, watching Clara quietly. The piece she played was not a famous tune. It was something she made up on the spot, a mix of memory and feeling. There were hints of the lullabies her father used to play, pieces of songs she'd practiced in the old days at her music school, and emotions she couldn't express in words. Each note felt alive, as if it carried a story of its own. She thought about all the nights she had come home too tired to even touch her small second-hand keyboard, about the way she had convinced herself that music was something she couldn't afford anymore, a luxury, not a life. But sitting there now under the golden light, it didn't feel like luxury. It felt like breathing again. When she finished her piece, the silence that followed was almost as powerful as the music itself. The guests didn't clap immediately this time. They just sat quietly, caught in the moment. Then one by one, soft applause began, spreading through the restaurant like ripples in still water. Clara stood, embarrassed and overwhelmed, bowing her head slightly. Her cheeks burned, but her smile was genuine. She turned toward Mr. Simmons, half expecting him to scold her for stepping out of line. But instead, he was standing near the bar, looking at her with wide eyes and, for once, no trace of irritation. When their eyes met, he nodded once, slowly in silent approval. She went back to her duties, her hands still shaking slightly. But something strange was happening at the executives' table. The men had returned to their discussion, but their tones were different now. Gentler, more open. The older man, the one who had seemed most frustrated before, now leaned toward the others, his voice calm. "Let's start again," he said quietly. Clara didn't understand what they were talking about, but she could sense that something had changed. Where there had been tension, there was now cooperation. Where there had been impatience, there was now patience. She didn't know it, but her music had done what hours of negotiation hadn't. It had reminded them that they were all human. As she passed their table again to refill their glasses, one of the men, the youngest of the group, smiled at her. "That was beautiful," he said simply. "Do you play professionally?" Caught off guard, she shook her head. "No, sir," she said softly. "Not anymore?" "Well," he said, taking his drink, "you should." His tone wasn't casual. It was sincere, almost thoughtful, as if he were saying something important without needing to explain it. Clara smiled politely and stepped away, but his words lingered in her mind. "You should." It had been years since anyone told her that. Years since anyone believed in her music. As she cleared another table, she saw Mr. Simmons speaking quietly to the restaurant's general manager. Both of them kept glancing in her direction. For a moment she worried she was in trouble after all, but then the manager smiled, nodded once, and left the room. The rest of the evening moved more smoothly than anyone had expected. The executives laughed, genuinely laughed, for the first time that night. Plates were emptied, glasses refilled, and the heavy air that had hung over the room was gone. Even the rain outside had stopped, as if the storm itself had passed with Clara's music. When the guests finally stood to leave, the man with silver hair, clearly the one in charge, paused near the piano. He looked at Clara and said, "That piece you played? It reminded me of something my daughter used to play when she was young. Thank you." Clara froze, unsure how to respond. "I'm glad you liked it," she said softly. He smiled, a tired but genuine smile, and followed his colleagues out of the restaurant. After they were gone, Mr. Simmons walked over to Clara, his expression still unreadable. "Well," he said slowly, "I don't know if you realize what just happened here, but you might have saved that dinner." She laughed nervously. "I just played the piano." He shook his head. "No, you did more than that." She didn't understand exactly what he meant, but deep inside, she felt lighter than she had in a long time. For the first time in years, she felt proud of herself, not for surviving another long shift, but for doing something that mattered. That night, when she finally took off her apron and left through the back door, the city lights shimmered against the wet pavement. She stood for a moment, breathing in the cool air, and smiled to herself. She didn't know it yet, but the music she played that night would echo far beyond the restaurant, into boardrooms, headlines, and her own future. What had started as a tired waitress trying to fill the silence had quietly become something extraordinary. The following evening, the Belmont Hotel restaurant seemed different, lighter, almost glowing. The chandeliers sparkled a little brighter. The staff moved with a bit more ease, and even the guests seemed to speak in softer tones. But for Clara Evans, everything still felt unreal. She had gone home the night before thinking she might get scolded for playing the piano without permission. Instead, she'd received a quiet thank you from Mr. Simmons and a long, thoughtful look from the hotel's general manager. No one had said much, but she could sense it. Something about her music had changed the night. When she returned to work that next day, whispers followed her. "That's her," someone said near the staff counter. "She's the one who played for the executives." Another waiter added, "Apparently the deal they were arguing about got finalized right after dinner." Clara blushed every time she overheard them. She didn't know what finalized meant exactly, but it sounded good. Still, she tried to act normal, wiping tables, setting silverware, checking menus. She didn't want attention. She wasn't used to it. But as she worked, she couldn't stop thinking about the way the piano had felt beneath her hands, the way the sound had filled the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. For one brief moment, she had been completely herself, not a waitress, not a background figure, but Clara, the musician she once dreamed of becoming. Around 7 in the evening, the same group of executives returned to the restaurant. This time the mood was entirely different. They smiled, shook hands warmly with the staff, and spoke with an ease that hadn't been there the night before. Clara recognized the man with the silver hair, the one who had thanked her for her music. He saw her too and gave a polite nod of recognition. When they took their seats again, Clara went over to serve them as usual. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said, her voice calm though her heart was fluttering. "Good evening, Miss Evans," the silver-haired man said kindly, glancing at her name tag. "We were hoping you'd be here again tonight," she smiled shyly. "Yes, sir. Just another shift," he chuckled. "Something tells me your music will outlast these shifts." Clara didn't quite know what to say to that. She simply thanked him and stepped away, her cheeks warm. Later, as the dinner went on, one of the men approached Mr. Simmons and quietly asked if the young waitress pianist could play again. "Just for a few minutes, like last night." The request surprised everyone, including Clara. "Are you sure?" she asked softly. The man nodded. "Yes, please. It's been a long day. I think we could all use a little bit of what you gave us yesterday." With Mr. Simmons's hesitant approval, Clara sat down at the piano again. The same soft golden light fell across her hands. The same air of calm anticipation filled the room. But this time she wasn't nervous. She was ready. Her fingers touched the keys and the music began, smooth, emotional, full of warmth. She didn't play the same melody as before. This one was brighter, livelier, like the start of something new. The executives leaned back in their seats, smiling faintly, tapping their feet to the rhythm. One of them whispered to another, "Can you believe that's the waitress?" And the other replied quietly, "Some people have more talent than they ever get credit for." The melody rose, twirled, and then softened again, landing gently like a feather falling on water. The restaurant was silent except for her music. Even guests who weren't part of the meeting turned to listen. There was something about the way Clara played that made people feel something: hope, calm, connection. It wasn't perfect or rehearsed, but it was real. When she finished, applause came from every corner of the restaurant, louder than before, genuine and warm. Clara stood quickly, her face flushed, bowing her head slightly before returning to her post. At the executives' table, the silver-haired man leaned toward his colleagues. "It's strange," he said with a small smile. "Yesterday we were minutes away from walking out, and now it all feels different." The younger executive nodded. "Her music changed the room," he said. "Made us remember we're not just talking about numbers. We're building something that affects people." Their conversation continued, lighter and more human than before. Clara didn't hear their words, but she could sense the shift. The tension that had hung over them the first night was gone. They laughed more freely, joked about their travels, even invited Mr. Simmons to share a toast when the deal was officially signed later that evening. By the end of the night, Clara was exhausted but glowing. When the executive stood to leave, the silver-haired man approached her again. "You have a gift, Miss Evans," he said warmly. "You reminded us that some things in life are worth more than figures on a page." She smiled, unsure how to respond. "Thank you, sir. I'm glad you liked the music." "Liked?" He chuckled softly. "It changed the way we talked, the way we listened. You did more than play, you guided us." He reached into his coat pocket and handed her a small business card. "Our company supports a cultural arts foundation," he explained. "If you ever want to study music again, call that number. I mean it." Clara stared at the card, speechless. Her eyes shimmered, but she quickly blinked the tears away. "I don't know what to say." "Just promise me," he said kindly. "You won't stop playing," and with that, he gave a respectful nod and left the restaurant. Clara stood there for a long time, the card trembling in her hand. The golden light of the chandeliers reflected off its smooth surface, a symbol of hope, of something she thought she'd lost forever. That night, after everyone had gone and the restaurant was quiet again, Clara sat down at the piano one last time. She didn't play for anyone this time, and not for guests, not for executives, and just for herself. And as her music filled the empty hall, she smiled softly, realizing something simple and beautiful. Sometimes, life's biggest turning points don't come with fanfare or planning. Sometimes they come disguised as ordinary shifts, waiting for you to find your courage and press the first key. The next few days passed like a dream Clara couldn't quite wake up from. The story of the waitress who played the piano had quietly spread through the Belmont Hotel like a warm breeze. Staff members who used to pass her without a glance now greeted her with smiles. Guests whispered and pointed softly when she walked by, curious to see the girl who had turned a tense corporate dinner into a moment of peace. But Clara didn't let it change her. She still arrived early, tied her apron neatly, and served with the same care she always had. Yet inside, something had shifted. There was a lightness in her step now, a quiet spark in her eyes. Every time she passed the piano, she felt an invisible pull, like it was calling her name. Then, one afternoon, Mr. Simmons asked her to meet him in his office. His tone had been serious, and for a moment Clara's nerves returned. She wondered if she had done something wrong after all. When she stepped into the small office, Mr. Simmons looked up from his paperwork and smiled. Not the forced, professional smile he usually wore, but a genuine one. "Clara," he said, leaning back in his chair, "do you have any idea what happened after that dinner?" She shook her head, clutching her hands nervously. "No, sir. I just heard the deal went well." He chuckled softly. "That's an understatement. The deal didn't just go well, it closed. The executives told management it was one of the smoothest negotiations they'd had in years. And they mentioned you by name." "Me?" she asked, surprised. "Yes," he said. "Apparently when things were getting tense, your music changed the entire mood. One of the executives said your piano playing reminded them why they started the partnership in the first place. That it wasn't just about money, but about people." Clara blinked, unsure what to say. She had never thought her music could have that kind of effect. She had simply played to ease the silence. Mr. Simmons continued. "The CEO himself sent a letter to the hotel's director this morning. He thanked the staff, of course, but he made a special note about you. Said your spontaneous performance reminded him of what sincerity looks like." Clara's eyes widened. "He did?" Mr. Simmons nodded. "And that foundation card he gave you, I looked it up. It's not just for show. They fund full scholarships for young artists. If you apply, there's a very good chance they'll take you." For a moment, Clara couldn't speak. All the years of hard work, the exhaustion, the quiet nights she spent dreaming of music, they came rushing back like a wave. I don't know what to say," she finally whispered. "Say you'll think about it," Mr. Simmons said kindly. "And in the meantime, the general manager wants you to play every Friday evening. Officially this time. You'll still serve during the week, but on Fridays, you'll be our pianist." Clara froze. "Are you serious?" he smiled. "Completely." Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. She wiped them quickly, laughing softly. "Thank you, sir, really." That Friday, the restaurant was packed. Word had spread beyond the hotel. Guests came not only for the food, but for her. When she walked to the piano in her crisp uniform, applause greeted her before she even played a note. She blushed, bowing slightly, and then began to play. This time, the music wasn't hesitant or shy. It was confident, glowing with life. The melody rose and danced like sunlight spilling across water. It was joyous and emotional all at once, the kind of sound that made people stop their conversations and simply listen. Among the crowd that evening were several familiar faces, including the executives from that fateful dinner. They had returned, this time as friends, not business rivals. The silver-haired man sat near the front, his hands folded, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. When the final notes faded, he stood up and clapped. Soon the whole restaurant joined him. Clara bowed again, tears glistening in her eyes. After the performance, the silver-haired man approached her once more. "Miss Evans," he said warmly, "we've been telling your story at every office we visit. Do you know what's interesting? Every time we do, people listen a little more closely, a little more kindly. You reminded us that human moments still matter, even in business." Clara smiled softly. "I didn't mean to do anything big," she said. "I just wanted to help," he chuckled. "That's exactly why it worked." He handed her a folder, a simple white one with the company's logo printed on top. "Inside is your scholarship application. I've already written a letter of recommendation." She blinked, stunned. "You did that for me?" "Of course," he said. "Consider it our way of saying thank you. You helped close a billion-dollar deal. The least we can do is help you chase your dream." Clara held the folder close to her chest, her throat tightening with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. "You already did," he replied with a smile. "The night you played that piano. That night, when Clara returned home, she placed the folder on her small kitchen table and sat staring at it for a long time. The city outside hummed quietly, but in her heart, everything felt still. She thought about the little girl she used to be, the one who dreamed of grand pianos and shining stages, who believed music could touch people's hearts. She thought she'd lost that girl somewhere along the way, buried under bills and responsibilities. But maybe she realized that girl had never really left. Clara smiled through her tears, whispering to herself, maybe it's not too late. She looked toward the window, where the faint reflection of the city lights flickered, and for the first time in years she believed in her future again. The piano, the music, the dream, they were all waiting, and this time, she was ready to play. The morning sun streamed softly through Clara's small apartment window, catching the edges of the scholarship folder that now sat open on her table. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the piano keys, those same keys that had changed her life without her even realizing it. A few days had passed since that night, yet everything still felt surreal. The executives' company had officially confirmed her scholarship to study music, full tuition, living expenses, and even a small monthly stipend. The letter described it as a reward for inspiring connection through art. Clara must have read those words 20 times, each time with a different kind of disbelief. She ran her fingertips over the embossed company seal at the bottom of the letter, still half expecting it to disappear like a dream. But it was real. Her heart fluttered with equal parts excitement and fear. For so long, her life had been a straight line. Work, sleep, repeat. Now suddenly the world had opened up again, full of possibilities she didn't know how to handle. That afternoon, Clara walked into the Belmont Hotel for her shift, maybe her last one as a full-time waitress. The familiar sounds greeted her, clinking dishes, murmured conversations, the scent of coffee and fresh bread. Everything looked the same, yet nothing felt the same. As she entered, Mara, her closest friend among the staff, ran up to her, eyes wide with excitement. "Is it true?" she asked, gripping Clara's arm. "Mr. Simmons told me." "You're going to study music?" Clara laughed a little shyly. "It looks like it," she said. "I still can't believe it myself." Mara squealed softly, then hugged her tight. "You deserve this more than anyone, Clara. You really do." Their laughter caught the attention of Mr. Simmons, who stepped out from behind the counter with a rare grin. "Well, Miss Evans," he said, straightening his tie, "looks like we'll be needing a new Friday pianist soon, though I'm not sure we'll ever find one quite like you." Clara smiled warmly. "Thank you for giving me the chance, sir." He waved his hand. "Chance? You gave this place a story people will talk about for years. You gave this hotel a little soul." Those words hit her deeply. For the first time, she realized that her music hadn't just changed the deal that night. It had changed everyone a little. Even Mr. Simmons, who had once cared only about precision and performance, now spoke with softness. That evening, the restaurant held a small farewell dinner for her. The staff had arranged it secretly. Nothing fancy, just candles, laughter, and heartfelt words. Someone even brought a small cake that said, "Play on, Clara," written in icing. After the meal, Mara nudged her toward the piano. "Come on," she said. "One last song before you go." Clara hesitated, her hands trembling again, not from fear this time, but from gratitude. She sat down at the piano and looked around the room. Every face she saw had become part of her journey. People who had once been strangers but now felt like family. She began to play. Not the same melancholy tune from that first night, but a brighter, fuller version of it. It was her goodbye and her beginning all at once. The notes danced through the air like light beams, soft, hopeful, alive. When she finished, there were tears in more than a few eyes. Even Mr. Simmons looked away quickly, pretending to check his watch. "You'd better go chase that dream before we all start crying," he muttered. Clara laughed, wiping her eyes. "I will." As she walked home under the night sky, she thought about how everything had changed because of one simple decision: to play. Not for fame, not for money, but because something inside her refused to stay silent. The next morning, she boarded a train with her small suitcase, her father's old metronome tucked inside. She watched the city fade away behind her and felt the weight of her old life lift. Ahead of her lay new classrooms, new pianos, and a world that finally felt open. Weeks later, A news article appeared online. Waitress's piano performance inspires billion-dollar deal and wins her music scholarship. The piece told her story simply without glamour. How a young woman's courage to follow her heart turned an ordinary evening into something unforgettable. Clara didn't read it more than once. She didn't need to. What mattered most wasn't the fame or the scholarship. It was what the music had reminded her, that even small acts, born from honesty, can ripple outward in ways we never expect. Years later, when people spoke of that evening at the Belmont Hotel, they remembered the deal, the executives, the success, but most of all they remembered her, the quiet waitress who sat at the piano, and with one improvised song, reminded everyone what it meant to feel human. And somewhere, in a bright music hall miles away, Clara played again, this time not for tips or approval, but for the sheer joy of it. Each note carried gratitude, courage, and the memory of the night that had changed her life forever. Several years later, the Belmont Hotel had changed in many ways. New furniture, new staff, new name even. But one thing had become a quiet legend within its golden walls. The night a young waitress had saved $1 billion deal with a piano. Some said it was luck, others said it was destiny, but everyone agreed it was unforgettable. And on a warm spring evening, that story came full circle. A grand event was taking place in the very same dining hall, a charity gala organized by the same international company, whose deal had once been rescued by a simple melody. The chandeliers sparkled above a sea of elegant guests. Laughter mingled with the sound of champagne glasses, and at the center of it all stood a glossy black grand piano. The crowd buzzed with excitement, for tonight's featured performer was someone special, Clara Evans, now a rising concert pianist invited to play at the place where her journey had begun. Backstage, Clara took a deep breath, smoothing the satin fabric of her gown. It still felt surreal to her sometimes, the tours, the scholarships, the applause. But tonight wasn't about fame or success. Tonight was about coming home. When she stepped onto the stage, a hush fell over the room. The guests turned toward her, and among them sat familiar faces, executives older now but smiling with recognition. Near the front was the silver-haired man who had once handed her that life-changing business card. His hair was whiter, but his eyes still held the same warmth. Clara met his gaze and smiled. Then she sat down at the piano. Her hands hovered above the keys for a moment, just like they had all those years ago. But this time there was no trembling, no fear, only peace. She began to play the same improvised piece she had played that first night, the one born from pure emotion and courage. The melody started softly, echoing memories of rain and quiet tables, and then grew richer, deeper, brighter. As she played, the audience seemed to drift into the same spell as before. Conversations faded and hearts listened. The music carried something more powerful than words. It carried history, gratitude, and love. The notes seemed to tell a story, of a tired waitress who had dared to follow a forgotten dream, of a deal that turned into friendship, of a melody that had become a bridge between strangers. Each chord shimmered with feeling, each pause breathed meaning. When the final note faded into silence, the room erupted with applause, standing, thunderous, heartfelt. The silver-haired man stood too, his eyes glistening as he clapped with the others. Clara stood and bowed gracefully, but there were tears in her eyes. It wasn't the applause that moved her. It was the memory of who she had been when it all began. After the performance, as guests mingled and congratulated her, the silver-haired man approached her once again. "You've come a long way, Miss Evans," he said with a smile. "I always knew you would." Clara laughed softly. "You gave me the chance to try," she said. "I'll never forget that night." "Neither will I," he replied. "It reminded me that sometimes the smallest moments, a song, a smile, a spark of courage, can change everything." Later that night, after the crowd had left and the lights dimmed, Clara lingered in the empty hall. The piano sat there, gleaming under the soft glow of the chandeliers. She ran her hand across its smooth surface, smiling. It was the same instrument, the same one she had once touched nervously while clearing tables. She sat down again, alone this time, and played one last soft tune, not for anyone else, but for the girl she used to be. As the notes filled the quiet room, she remembered every moment, the exhaustion, the fear, the unexpected courage that had changed everything. She remembered her father's voice teaching her how to find emotion in every key, And she remembered how one small act, following her heart for just a moment, had rewritten her entire life. When the final note faded, she closed the piano lid gently and whispered, "Thank you." Outside, the city lights shimmered, and a soft wind carried the faint echo of her music through the night. Somewhere far away, people who had never met her might still tell the story of the waitress who was asked to clear tables but instead sat down at a piano and, with a single improvised song, reminded a room full of powerful men what humanity sounds like. And though years would pass, that story, and the melody that went with it, would never be forgotten. Because sometimes, one act of quiet courage can echo longer than any applause, go longer than any applause.